And who do we have on the show this week? Ms. Jane Jazrawi. I probably
Perfect.
screwed that one up.
No, you did not.
Oh, didn't I? Hey, so that's
You
Jane.
did.
And what are we talking about this week? Everything Carrier's Edge. Let's bring Jane in. Hey, good day, Jane. How are you?
Very well, and you said my name very perfectly.
Well, that's unusual that I don't screw up somewhere. But
Oh no, so we're gonna have a big screw up later.
oh, probably. Jane, thanks for coming on. Let's
Pleasure to be.
let's get right to it. All right. Here, are you
All right,
ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
What do you got?
The
Bring it
best
on.
fleets to drive for. Well, just to let our listeners know, what are the topics? We're going to be talking about the best fleets to drive for, and then we're going to get into online training, the pros and the cons.
Yes,
Okay,
and where
so
to start, and how to do it, and why, and wherefore, and all that.
and whatchamacallits.
And excellent, exactly.
Great. So let's start with the best fleets to drive for. What is that all about?
The best fleets to drive for is a annual survey and contest of the best fleets in North America for a driver to work with. And we've been doing this since 2000. I guess we're in the 13th year. It started 2007, I believe, was the first one. And because of different scheduling things, actually not to do with the pandemic, amazingly enough, but we had to start it at a different time of the year. So normally we start the process after Labor Day. We start nominations. And what happens is drivers can nominate the fleet that they work for as if they think it's one of the best fleets to drive for. It's a place where it's a great workplace, stellar, wonderful. And then what happens is the company, the carrier, is invited to participate, and they have to do a huge questionnaire about everything to do with their operations and how it affects their drivers. And then they also have to get a certain amount of driver surveys done. And then at the end of that process, we take all of the questionnaires that we got from the carriers, and then we take all the driver surveys and we crunch up all those numbers, and we come up with a top 20 that we announce usually at the end of January, but this year it's going to be the beginning of January. So every year we do this. And the nomination period has just ended this year, which is why it's been pushed 2 months back. It's gone a little nuts.
All right.
So
I heard that you had a record number of nominees.
I know we were when we first changed the schedule this year, and it's going to go back to normal next year, but when we first changed the schedule this year, I thought, and Mark, my co-founder, also thought that, we're not going to get, it's going to be a struggle. Maybe we'll get 20. We won't. Oh, well, let's see how it goes. And, but we recently hired a gentleman named Chris Henry, who is our vice president and deals specifically with programs. And one of his goals was to get the nominations up. And normally our record was around 140. And I think we're 153 or 155 this year. So that's a lot of interviewing that we're going to have to do. So that's great. Like, we're really happy that people have been wanting to participate, and it actually kind of makes sense, now that I'm sort of on the other end of, when the pandemic started, and we knew that we were going to be doing the program early. We thought, no one's going to want to do it. But now, coming through the last few months, I can sort of see why people would want to really appreciate the carrier that they work for, because there's a lot of carriers who've done really, really, really well at taking care of their drivers through this period. And I've really noticed how much the communication has really expanded with fleets and what they're doing, and the different ways that people are honoring their drivers. So it's been really nice to see.
Yeah, I think some of the carriers have really stepped up during this and are doing outstanding things.
Oh, yeah. So I'm really like one of the things that we're going to be asking about that's a little bit different is, how have you changed your operations during the pandemic? What have you done for your drivers? Do you issue more PPE? Do you have different truck cleaning methodologies? Like, what is different? Like, how has your business changed since the pandemic? So we're probably going to get a lot of really good information.
Yeah, I think that's pretty exciting. Now, I know this is in conjunction with, I'm not sure what the relationship is between this program, the 50 Best Fleets to Drive For, and TCA. Do you have to be a TCA member?
You do not. And there are a top 20, not a top 50. So it's only 20. Um, we couldn't get 50 people on the stage. That would be bad. But anyway, what happened way back when we started the program, we were trying to find a partner. We were trying to find a media partner. And it was really difficult because in 2006, no one really wanted to do it. It was, now everybody has kind of a recognition program, but nobody wanted to do it back then. And we were introduced to the Truckload Carriers Association in the U.S. by Mr. Peter Charbonneau, who runs Over the Road or owns Over the Road. And so he wanted to initially be the magazine partner, but then when he and Mark, I wasn't really involved in it, but he and Mark sort of discussed it and thought that the TCA would be a really good partner just because they operate in Canada and the United States, and they really are at the time they were less about regulations, but more about best practices and sharing those practices. And they had the Driver of the Year contest and the safety contest, so it was a really good fit.
And it was, and as you say, 7 years later. Right?
No, 13.
13.
13.
I thought you said 7, but it's been around
2007. 2007 was when it started. So yeah, I guess 13. And It's weird because I always get confused because the year we always do it for the next year. So this year is 2021 because we give the award in 2021, but we start in 2020. Just to confuse things.
Yeah, okay.
Because you make it interesting.
I'm glad. I'm glad you can keep it straight. I can't.
Oh my God, it's just well, part of the reason that we have deadlines, and this is why the dates changing were really screwing us up, because the dates are the dates because I can remember them. So the day after Labor Day, I can remember that.
Yeah.
Nominations close Halloween. I can remember that. But now the nominations closed on Labor Day, so that was kind of weird. And then New Year's Eve is the deadline for driver surveys, and then so it was always the same, and it was always based around holidays. It was never based around a date. So that was because I'm not good. I'm not good with dates. I'm not good with anniversaries. I'm terrible.
Well, I think you are pretty darn good at it all because you keep it all organized. So tell us a little bit about Carrier's Edge, how you and your partner, Mark, started this whole thing.
Oh, you want the whole, back in the day when it first started in our...
Well, I remember Mark telling me he used to work for a little company called Apple.
Yes. So I think that our love of the Apple computer is kind of how we ended up together. And it's because separately, before we ever met each other, we were both Mac users. And I had actually I was a teacher in when I graduated from university. I graduated with a B.Ed. I went into classroom training. And one of the things that you can do to progress in your career as a teacher is take additional qualification courses. Right. And what I did was I was taking additional qualification courses in computers in the classroom. And I did it at the Scarborough Board of Education, and they used all Macs. And I really liked them. I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. I had used a Mac before, but I didn't own one or anything like that. And there was way back in the day, there was a company called SoftArc, which made a piece of software called First Class. And First Class was email. But what you could do, and this was in the 80s and 90s, so this was in the very early 90s, you could send a message to a group, which was, this was back in dinosaur days, right? So the fact that you could send a message to a folder called a conference and then have a discussion in the conference, this doesn't sound like a big deal now because you have Slack, you have Facebook, but none of that existed then. And it was on a Mac, so the interface was not like, it wasn't, your regular text. So you would actually look at these pictures of folders and be able to send messages, and you could upload pictures and things like that. So it was really, really cool. And the Scarborough Board of Education had actually paid this consulting company to make it. And I fell in love with it. And I actually started working for the company. And they were all Apple-based, all Macs. And then that's where I met Mark. And he had worked for Apple, and he had done tech support. So I was doing training, and he was doing tech support. And we met in working for SoftArc, basically, I taught people how to set up their servers, and he did tech support. And one of the things that I would have these, I did classroom teaching. It was classroom training. So I was playing with online training at the time. Like, it was more like you have to use a modem, and it was much more difficult than it is now. But to set up the system, people would buy the system and then they would set it up, and a lot of universities were using it, and a lot of things called BBSs. Did you ever use a BBS?
I never used it, but was that a bulletin board? Bulletin
board service. And this is so geeky. I'm telling you, the geekiest thing ever. So the people who were living in their basements, and me, you could get a modem and attach it to your computer, and you could dial up to these things called BBSs. And basically you would talk to each other. You would just type things at each other. It was like Facebook with no pictures. You would just, talk about Star Trek. That's how bad it was. It was just, it was completely wretched. I loved it. And I was using, in the 80s, I was actually using, old, super slow modem to talk to people this way. But schools really started getting interested in it. And there was all of these people who had these things called bulletin board systems, which were basically just chat rooms. And you would just dial in with your modem, and you would have to know the number, and you'd have to know all of the different configuration, and you would go and talk to people about things you liked. So it might be basketball or Star Trek or some other science fiction thing or computers. It was really, really popular for a certain portion of the population. So I was teaching people how to set these things up. I was teaching schools how to set them up. And that was where I learned a lot about tech. I learned a lot about, this wire goes in here, and this is what the internet is. And Mark was, so I would have these classes, and they would come for 2 days, and they would stay over at a hotel, and they would come to my class for 2 days, and we would feed them lunch. And at lunch, the feature was that I would get someone from tech support to come down and talk to them about whatever problem they were having. And so I'd have to go to the tech support room and say, okay, is anybody going to come and help me? Can someone come and talk to these people? And they'd all ask me what was for lunch. What do you order for lunch? What are you getting for lunch, Jane? And so Mark would always have lunch, because I would order whatever he wanted. So it would be like, okay, you'll come down. Okay, good. Come talk to my customers. So yeah, that was how we met.
Okay, so
nothing to do with.
So how did that carry over to Carrier's Edge?
Well, we basically worked together from that time, since the mid-90s. We've worked together ever since. We worked together So we got together and we also kept working together. We've always had a really, really good working relationship. I have the right brain and he has the left brain, and we just meld really well. And what happened was I left, and then I brought him over to PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is where I went. And then when we were doing at PricewaterhouseCoopers, we were doing online training. Like we started doing computer-based training and then web-based training. And he was working in the technical end of it, and I was working in the writing part of it. So we did a lot of training for big companies, a lot of it. And what we decided after a while is that we were tired of being hired out by consulting companies to make them money. We wanted to make the money ourselves. So we were like, hey, you know what? Let's have our own company. So we had just gone through like 10 years of the two of us working together and just working on technical things and working on online training, or the precursor to what we know now as web-based training. It was like you had to plug a CD in, and started going out on our own. And we didn't know anything. So we started off doing consulting. We thought, okay, we will sell courses to whoever wants us to build a course. But that requires sales. And we are not a sales organization. Mark and I are not interested in selling anybody anything. And so we were like, okay. What we realized is that a lot of the people who had online training didn't need us, because they had their pick of e-learning consultants and different companies. There were tons and tons and tons of e-learning consultants who would do exactly the same thing that we did. So we were trying to figure out, what can we do differently? And Mark had really done a lot of work at PwC on learning management systems, and he wanted to build one. He had built a couple already for different clients, and he wanted to build something else. So he decided that he wanted to have a company that built an LMS as well. And my specialty was designing training and doing all of that. So we kind of wanted to do that together. And the consulting part wasn't going so well. So we kind of put our heads together and figured out, well, who needs training? Like, who needs online training? And we came to the conclusion that trucking was one segment. We were looking at daycare, like daycare providers could probably use it. Like, where people who needed training, they were geographically dispersed, that couldn't get to a classroom. It was difficult to get to a classroom, but they still needed to be updated all the time. So early childhood education, trucking, and travel. Travel industry was also something we were looking at. And it ended up that trucking won.
Yay!
Trucking, we started with the transportation of dangerous goods course. That is actually still mostly how it is. Like, we built it 12, 13 years ago, and no, it must be longer than that, 15 years ago. And it still holds up. And like, we are going to do an overhaul of it, but the way it was constructed and how it works, it still is a solid course. But that was the first, but we had no idea how we were going to sell it. We had no idea, like, we thought that maybe trucking companies would want to just buy it, and no. It took us a long time. It wasn't the same model. So we kind of figured out our whole model, which is a subscription model. Like, you pay for a certain amount of licenses per month. And so we settled on that, and trucking seemed to like that. But at the beginning, I'm telling you, it was hard. People in 2006 did not believe that their drivers could use a computer.
Well, there's still some companies today that don't believe the drivers can use a computer. Hence, ELDs are a problem.
It's interesting, because ELDs seem like way more of a problem before you implement them than after you've implemented them. In the US, because we were running best fleets a few years before the ELD mandate went in, and we were talking to companies who were putting in ELDs anyway, way before the mandate, like 3 or 4 years before the mandate. And we would ask them how it's going, and they'd tell us about how many people quit.
Yeah.
So they would say, oh, yeah, about 40% of our drivers quit. And we'd be like, oh, wow. And then they say, and then they come back. They come back when they realize that the ELD isn't that bad and is actually helpful. So we started realizing that, the whole ELD thing was not it was more in people's heads than the actual technology being a problem. And so my suspicion is that even though people are a little worried about the ELD mandate here in Canada, I don't think it will be. I think it's going to be very similar to the US, where everybody is like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And then it happens and people get through it. And it will, and that's really, I have taught people technology for so many years. That is exactly what happens every single time. The fear gets you, but it's really not, the more you know, the less fear you have. So for companies who are switching to ELDs, the main thing that I would say is get your oldest, crustiest driver who doesn't want to change anything and get them to be the pilot. Get them to test it out. And they can figure it out. And because your the biggest, not fan, but the biggest person who can help change minds is the person who hated it, but who's been turned to, taken from the dark side to the light. I've done this where I've trained people as what are called super users. So they get special training, they get one-on-one training, and their job is to go and say, you be the helper. You go and help other people with their questions, because having someone who's your peer answering the questions, and if you can see someone else using it successfully, it's so much easier. It just makes it a dream. So start with the person who really hates it.
And
you get them to do it.
And you don't even sell ELDs. So.
But we do sell technology, like online learning is technology, and it's a different way of doing things. So you do have to do that change management where, it's not going to, you basically have to tell people what they can expect and how to manage that.
Well, what's the difference? The good, the bad, the ugly. There's several different types of training. There's in-person training, there's group training, the Saturday mornings where typically the poor truck driver ruins his weekend, gets a lousy breakfast, and doesn't get paid to show up, but must show up because it's mandatory. There's that type of training. There's one-on-one training. There's the tailgate type training where it's only 2 or 3 drivers. And then there's online training. And I guess maybe even today we could even throw in Zoom training, because as we record this in the middle of the pandemic, I don't know of anybody that's doing Zoom training as a group, but it would be possible today. Speak to me about the pros and the cons of all the different types.
One of the things that you have to think about when you're doing any kind of training, so you're teaching someone something. So I always say that training, especially for adults, your goal is to change a behavior. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're trying to change something about that person. So you have to figure out how that change is going to be made the best way possible. So the delivery mechanism is not the delivery mechanism itself is something you can think about later. So if I was teaching something that requires practice, I would not do it online. So if you're I'll take vehicle inspections, because this is a really good example of something where all of the different types of training can come into play. And the best way to teach people how to do a proper inspection is by utilizing all of those different kinds. So you can start with the theory, and that's great. That's where online training is great. The theory should never change. So if you're looking at air brakes, for example, how you inspect an air brake should not change from day to day. unless you're changing your air brakes. But like the actual technology of the air brake is pretty standard. Your air brakes are going to be the same over the next 5 years. Just tell me if you think I'm completely out to lunch on this. But anyway, so you teach the theory. What are you looking for? What are the signs that something is wrong? How do you maintain it? Like all of those things you can teach as an online part of the overall training. That is something that you can learn, you can do a test on, you can say, okay, I understand the theory. I would not ever want to say, okay, now go do an inspection for a DOT officer or for, at the roadside. Because that's not enough. You know the theory, but you have to know how to put it into practice, and you have to know how to behave. So the behavior needs to be taught, and that needs to be taught by a person. So when you take the theory, everybody has the same training because they've all done it online. It's all even. And then you go out to a truck, out to the vehicle, and you start doing practical. And that's one-on-one. It can be small group. It can be, you can take them through a classroom first and sort of go through the various things that you're going to do, and then you go and practice it. Or what you can do for people who already know how to do an inspection, you can make it into a rodeo, like people call them rodeos or games or challenges where you go and, break a couple of things or, take them out, like take a fuel cap off or go and, break a handle or do something. So you can see if people can find those places, and it's a game and it's something that they can do as competitively. So all of those things can be done and can actually become a great training program because you've combined all of these different ways of learning. And the more ways of learning that you can put into an experience for people, the better they're going to learn. So you've got your visual learners who are looking at the theory online, the people who are kinesthetic learners who need to hold on to something and do something to learn it, the people who need to tell you what they've learned in order to really master it. You get all of that if you have a really good program where you have different activities for drivers. So if you decide that all you're going to do for your training program is do online training once a month on this subject and you never do anything else, that's like a 40% training. Like that's not going to be effective. That's my...
See? Well, I agree. I like taking the microphone and standing up in front of a group of drivers. But as you said, that is not the way most of us learn best. It's some form of combination of online, visual, and going out and doing, which is absolutely the best. Your example, I would have said, for me, I've never run the mountains. And I've read the book several times about how do I successfully use my brakes to, descend a large grade. Well,
right.
I know the book. I've even taught the book. But I wouldn't want to run the first time down the mountain without somebody beside me who knew what the heck they were doing.
Yes, I have been down a mountain in an RV. I have driven down a mountain in an RV, and I will tell you, I do not want to drive in a truck. I want to drive in a tractor trailer. It was bad enough with the RV, but it's tough. Yeah, no, but I know having that practical part is really, really important, especially for. And I know it sounds like a generalization, but I'm a very kinesthetic learner. I am like, don't give me the book. I want to try it. I want to try and program the microwave. I want to try and program, this computer. I want to see what it does. I want to see what happens when I make a mistake. I love that stuff. For me, I like the visual part of it as well, but I will often be doing something myself to make it so that I can take that information in. So I do a lot of doodling and I do a lot of playing with things, and it looks like I'm not paying attention, but I actually am paying attention better when I'm doing something. So that kinesthetic part is just so incredibly important. And I cannot remember why I was going to say that. Had a great point, Chris.
Yeah, that's...
Had a fabulous point, and I just completely lost it. What did you say?
When you remember, I was talking about going downhill with air brakes and everything, but just being...
Yeah, something. Sorry.
Just being I can't even say the word, respecting your time. I was going to say that anyways.
Cognitive?
No. Now I forget the word I was even trying to say, so.
The kinesthetic?
Respectful of your time.
Oh, well,
okay. We're nearing the end. So, I know, this has been great. What more should our listeners and viewers know about Carrier's Edge?
Well, we don't do practical training. However, so what do we need to know about Carrier's Edge? Well, we're an online driver training library. So when you get a subscription to our system, you have access to all of our titles. We have, I think we are about 70% bilingual now. So we have French and English. If you're in the U.S., we also have, so we deal with U.S. regulations, we do Canadian regulations, we'll do cross-border regulations. So we have a lot of different options for people in the USA and Canada. It's a month-to-month subscription, so you can cancel at any time. We don't lock you into a contract. It is good for fleets of 5 to a couple thousand. It doesn't matter the size, so it's really easy to tailor for your different needs. We do not do classroom training, but you can schedule classroom training. You can manage some of your classroom training through our system. We also allow you to upload your own information that you can then give to your drivers can be a safety training assignment, or it can be part of a larger program. We also have the ability to do surveys, so you can send surveys out to your drivers as well. And you can do it on we have a mobile app, so drivers can do this on their phones or their tablets as well as on a computer. So there you go.
And you have a very strong reporting and documentation. Well, I'm always thinking from the insurance side of things and, the litigation side of things. And I know that Carrier's Edge has great reporting and documentation so that you can prove that the driver was trained.
Yes, we do. We have a lot of different reporting functions. I believe that we have the best in the industry because we've been building them. We've been building reports for a really long time. And those reports, like you said, we do have insurance partners that use our reporting to see what's happening with their fleets. We have different safety consultant partners who use that reporting. Fleets themselves can use that reporting. We have the ability to send your report to your email address. We have a lot of notifications that can be sent directly to your email as well. So there's a lot of integration that we can do. We integrate with different systems. TruckRide is one of them. We're working with some of the camera systems. So we're working with Lytx, Idelic. We're really trying to integrate with different parts of the operation and not just be, okay, here's your training system or here's your training and dump it. So there's the reporting is actually, it's funny because I always think about it from the course point of view because that's what I do. But I think that people come for the courses and stay for the learning management system and the reporting because that's really a powerful thing that until you're in it, you don't really realize how much that can really help your operation when you can see who's done a course, when they did it, how long it took them, what IP address they were doing it from. Did they fail the test once or twice? What questions did they get wrong? Like, we have all of that information that you can get about a driver's particular performance, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've often said, and I don't know if any of my suggestions, um, you know, I promote Carrier's Edge when I'm out to see my carriers because
Thank you.
you have competitors, and I mentioned to you that I have my own small subscription service, and I've said, there's mine, there's Carrier's Edge, there's the one out of Texas, and if you want to do, the best one I think, and I've said this, is Carrier's Edge. Mine doesn't compare when it comes to reporting and some of the other things. Mine has just different stuff. It's Carrier's Edge is a great system. So.
Oh, thank you. And on our off time, we do best fleets. Between midnight and 2 in the morning, it's like, oh yeah.
Well, next year, what we'll have to do is before the nomination period, we'll have to have you back on to promote best fleets to drive for.
Yes,
right?
Because I always like getting more Canadian fleets. The Americans are very competitive, and I always like it when the Canadian fleets.
Well, this goes out.
Smack them up.
I still have about 60% U.S. viewers on this interview.
Okay.
Okay, so be careful what you say about my American viewers.
Well, I got to say that for a long time in bus fleets, the Canadians were really whooping ass.
That's okay.
They were, Bison won the overall award 3 times, and the Canadians were really doing really, really well. The Americans in the last 3 years have stepped it up, like really stepped it up in all kinds of things about communication and scorecards, and we've got just how they're communicating through Facebook and social media and video, and how they're integrating all of these different things. And so I'm always really excited to see when people are doing something like really new and really like pushing it out there, so that it brings everybody else's game up. So
perfect.
Keep it up, you guys. Do whatever it is you do.
Jane.
And then tell me about it.
Thanks so much. We'll have all your contact info down below in the show notes. I appreciate you so much coming on. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry?
Thank you for having me.
Ah, it was great. Thanks, Jane. I hope you loved the show as much as I did. Please leave us a like, a thumbs up, a review, a comment, a rating if it is in your heart. Thank you so much. And I do really appreciate your time. And join us again next week for another exciting interview.